Namaste all. Hope I am audible. I welcome the PhD scholars of Faculty of Ayurveda, Homeopathy, Medicine, Nursing and Physiotherapy in today's coursework session. We will begin as soon as our respected resource person joins. Yeah, we have with us Sir has joined. I welcome Sir, Dr. Shailesh Deshpande. Sir, am I audible?
Yes, Dr. Akshay, you are.
Yes. So I again welcome all the scholars and our respected resource person, Dr. Shailesh Deshpande sir. Sir is professor of Department of Ayurvedic Medicine, that is Kaya Chikitsa. Sir has done his doctoral studies from Maharashtra University of Health Sciences. He is his expertise is in research, having a vast experience of more than 15 years. Sir will guide us today on the protocol writing and designing. Sir, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Akshay. I'll share my screen.
Yes, sir. Please.
Is it visible?
Yes, sir. It is visible.
Okay. So, thank you, Dr. Akshay, for the generous introduction. We would like to start our topic today about the protocol writing. Now, why protocol writing? Because in modern world where we are living now, especially in the field of research, this is what we can call it as a tagline of research, that in God we trust, all others must bring data. So to collect the data, to uh, to collect the data in a particular way and to make it presentable and acceptable by the world, we need to have first a research protocol, because the protocol is the thing that will allow us to collect the data in a particular way. So what is a protocol basically? It is a written mechanism that describes how any clinical trial design, or how any trial design for that matter, would be implemented. So how are we going to do some research to achieve some particular objectives? And it is basically documentation of all the procedures which we are supposed to carry out when a medical hypothesis is to be evaluated. So these are just the book definitions of what is a protocol or what is a synopsis. So basically what it should include every step of the study. Precisely, we can divide a protocol into three parts. First of all, first part needs to explain about why our study is important, why it is important to do research on one particular study. Second, having established that why the study is important, we need to explain what is our research question. So based upon the importance of the study, what exactly we are aiming at, that we explain in the part of research question. And third and most important part is uh, the methodology. So how are we going to do the study? That comes in the third part of the study. So if we have rational answers of all these three questions in a research protocol, the protocol, we can call it, or a synopsis, we can call it as a complete or a good synopsis. So basically we write a protocol to have answers about these three questions. So we also need to understand who reads the protocol, who are the people for whom we write these protocols. Those are medical doctors, those are the nurses and the CRAs, the members of the ethics committees or the animal ethics committees, the reviewers who are going or the examiners who are going to review the work that is being conducted, or the publishers or the peer reviewers, or the editors of the journals to whom we will be submitting our research papers. And if it is a sponsored studies or an insured study, then the insurance companies are going to read it. So basically, these protocols are read by people who are very well versed with the medical field or the medical terminologies. So the language of the protocol should be appropriate to the audience. So we need not use any informal language or any unscientific wording should be avoided whenever we are trying to write a protocol. Now, these are all what we can say the wonders in the world, the 7 wonders in the world. Out of that, I have pasted here 5 wonders. And to build any of these wonders, no protocol was written. Some king or some emperor just ordered to build these monuments, and those were built by the contractors or the workers without writing anything on a paper. At least we don't have any evidence that any protocol was written while building the Great Wall of China or while building the Taj Mahal. So if these monuments or if these structures which are acclaimed as wonders did not were not built based on some protocol, why we should write a protocol, why we should have to write the pages together, some 50, 100, 200 pages protocol before we do anything? Because actually writing a protocol takes up minimum 1 month to maximum a year, and actually that eats up a lot of valuable time. That is what the researchers thinks. So if these monuments were not built by following some particular protocol or by following some written mechanism, why we should do that? See, the basic difference between the research and the culture or these types of monuments is that the reproducibility. We write a protocol or we conduct a research because we want that it should not be only us who can do it, but anyone in the world should be able to do it. Now, if we can compare our research work with these monuments are considered as wonders because they are not reproducible. And the main objective of conducting any type of research activity is to achieve the reproducibility of the results, whether in a laboratory, whether in some animal house, or whether in or be it in a hospital, or be it in an OPD or IPD or any other part, or any other part of the hospital. So reproducibility is the thing that we want to achieve by following a protocol, and these monuments are considered as wonders because they are not reproducible. So these are basically, we cannot have a comparison between the modern research and these protocols. The main objective of writing a protocol is to see the feasibility of reproducibility of the results that we are getting. So reproducibility is the thing that we should keep into mind while writing the protocol. The basic the basis or the basic idea of doing a research is reproducibility. Then again, why to have it in a written form? First of all, we should have a protocol to check if the objectives can be achieved or not. We have formulated a research question. We have decided to work on a particular topic, and we have uh, formulated or we have found out some objectives which we can implement to achieve our aims. Then to check whether these objectives can be achieved by that particular method, we need to write a protocol. Second thing, a lot of ideas come into our mind whenever we are trying to find out a research question or a research area. But when we have a thorough thinking about it, when we check the background, we find that it is not feasible, it is not possible to do this particular study because of these many reasons. And to see whether it is really possible or not to do a particular type of study, we need to have a written evidence of it. We need to write it somewhere, so that because our mind keeps on thinking a lot of factors at one particular time. So a thought coming to our mind at this particular movement will will not be same maybe an hour later or maybe on the next day. So whenever such a type of research question or research area comes to our mind, we should write it somewhere, and so that whenever we are doing the literature study or whenever we are doing some discussion with the experts or the guides, or we are doing some in Google search about that study, we can understand whether it is feasible to do that type of study or not. Then one important point, it the protocol basically creates a ground rules for all the partners. If it is a multicentric study, that is, if the study is going to be conducted at more than one places, then all the people who are involved in that study should have same rules, should understand the same rules. For example, if it is a study on fever or some febrile illnesses, and one particular site is collecting information about the intensity of fever in degrees Fahrenheit, and some other site or some other person involved in the study is collecting the information about fever in degrees Celsius, then the units are different, so the data does not become comparable. So the results of two different sites or the results of two different readings collected by two different people in different units cannot become comparable. So in that particular study, we will have to write in the protocol that the temperature will be measured in degrees Fahrenheit at all the sites. So this type of ground rules are laid whenever we are writing a protocol in a written format. It also prevents to collect the crucial information. For example, if I am doing study on obesity, and for that particular study, I am supposed to calculate the weight, the BMI, the skin fold thickness, the waist to hips ratio at each follow-up. But if I don't write it, then I may mistakenly forget to collect any of these criterias when a patient comes to me for a follow-up. If I'm in a hurry, I will I will probably check the height, check the weight and BMI, but I will not uh, measure the skin fold thickness or waist to hip ratio. And this is how the failure of collecting the data starts. And it leads to two things. Poorly collected data does not give us good results or reliable results or reproducible results. This is first thing that happens if we do not collect the data in time. And second thing that happens is whenever we have not collected any data, it is a human tendency to fabricate the data. So fabrication of data begins there, and that also dilutes the data, and the results are no more reliable. So if it is written, then it lays the ground rules for all the partners, and it makes us remember to collect the crucial information to collect to that is to be collected at each follow-up or at particular time points. Then whenever we are doing any type of research work, we need to have permission from that particular institute, that particular university, or from, if it is a clinical study, we need to have permission from ethics committees. If it is an animal study, we need to have permission from the animal ethics committees. So these bodies, these regulating bodies do not give permission on verbal basis. They need to have some written and signed documents which are related with the study. So for that purpose also, we need to have a protocol. So what is wrong if everyone is doing it, and what right is right even if only you are doing it. It is a human tendency that we always compare our research work with the work of other people. But we should keep in mind that whenever we are trying to find the research area, we should not have comparison with other people. We should not have comparison. Okay, this particular fellow has done this particular work, and I'll just add one more factor to it and I'll do it. It is a very wrong practice to have such type of research questions or such type of research protocols. So for that purpose, we need to have a good research area. So before we start to write any protocol, what we should have at as a background information is we should have answers to some relevant questions, that what is the public health importance of that particular problem, whether solving that particular health condition is a challenge, whether it is needed or whether it is not needed. For example, if in today's era, when we have paracetamol or some acetaminophen like products which are very good in relieving fever or in reducing fever, if I come up with some another formulation that that is helpful in febrile illnesses, whether it is really required or not should be our first question. So what is the public health importance of that particular research that we are planning to undertake is important, because with paracetamol it is cheap, it is easily available, it does not cause much side effects. There are cases of hepatic failure or some elements or some diseases of liver. It is known hepatotoxic, but in prolonged use it shows such type of effects. If I'm suffering from malaria and if I take paracetamol for a week, it is not going to cause any hepatotoxicity in me. Rather, the chances will be very less. So, whether it is important to find an alternative for paracetamol just for the sake of doing some type of research should be our first question. Why that particular health problem is important. If we find such a relevant health problem, for example, in a recent condition or in past 1.5 years, we are suffering from the condition of COVID-19. Rather, the world is suffering from the condition of COVID-19. So that becomes a relevant problem to have some solution or some particular aspect of COVID-19, like prevention of complications or maintenance of oxygen level in patients who are having comorbidities, or finding some potent antiviral drug that can nullify the virus in the body, like that can be a relevant health problem. So the next step before we write the protocol is to find a question that is relevant to the problem. For example, if I intend to work on COVID-19, then what research question would I take? Because it is not possible for me to work on all the aspects of COVID-19 at a time. So what research question should I focus on to make it a relevant study? For example, if I am doing a study on mild cases of COVID-19, if I intend to give some 5-10 medicines or some 2-3 medicines to COVID-19 patients who do not have any signs and symptoms, or who do not have any comorbidities, or who do not have any severe uh, complications of COVID-19, then will it be relevant question? Because the world data shows that a majority of the patients who do not have any comorbidities or who do not have any severe symptoms get recovered on their own. So even though it may look very fantastic to work on COVID-19 situation, trying to find a solution on mild cases of COVID-19 will not be a relevant research question, because the condition uh, may get remitted on its own, and it is very difficult to demonstrate that the remission in mild cases without any symptoms is on its own or because of our intervention. So that becomes an irrelevant research question, though the public health problem is very, very important. Then third question, if we satisfy first two steps of the study, that is the public health problem and the relevant research question, though our objectives are consistent with the study question, that becomes the third most important factor that we should that we should think of before we begin to write the protocol. We have good research question to, for example, say I am planning a study with some Ayurvedic medicine to avoid complications in diabetes mellitus. I have a relevant research question whether my medicine is going to prevent the diabetic retinopathy, due to which many people suffer from blindness or some other ophthalmic problems due to retinopathy. So these two problems or these two steps are satisfied, then I should focus on objectives. How I can demonstrate that my medicine is going to prevent the diabetic retinopathy. If I fail to do the fundoscopy, if I fail to have the fundus photographs of my particular study, then my objectives are not consistent with my research question. I may be able to demonstrate that the retina uh, is free from any exudates. The retina is free from any neovascularization, and the structure of retina is getting preserved. But if I do not have any objectives like fundus photographs in my study, then the two steps that I have fulfilled become redundant or irrelevant because of lack of particular objectives. So this particular step also needs to be considered before we start writing the protocol. Then the study design. So for the same problem, like of diabetic retinopathy, if I am doing a single arm study, then I don't have any comparator. So my study design should be such that I should have two arms whereby I can compare results of my medicine in comparison with another medicine, or in comparison with placebo, or in comparison with any other procedure uh, for the eyes, so that I can compare my work with that particular treatment modality to have an objectivity to my particular work about up to what level I can achieve goals, or I can achieve my objectives when I'm comparing with the standard or with the placebo. So how are we planning our study? What will be our study design to achieve those particular objectives becomes the next relevant thing that we should consider. Then the sufficient power, that is dependent on how many people or how many samples we are going to include in our study. For example, if I am going to include only 30 patients, because it is taught in the first year of our MD or MS that having sample size of 30 is sufficient for any type of clinical study. But uh, that is a myth. Minimum 30 is the sample size that is required for any type of clinical study, which is common, or rather which is not very rare condition. But we should calculate the sample size as per the prevalence rate, or we should calculate the sample size as per the effect size achieved in a similar previous studies. And in it is considered that a power less than 85% in any type of study is considered as not a good study. So the methodology, we should be able to define the sufficient what power our study is going to achieve, and it should not be less than 85%. And last and most important, especially in the doctoral studies, it is expected that it should have some impact on the public health. If uh, I would like to give an example that there are studies going on in other universities or in previous batches of our universities also, where if a particular person is working on to find a solution to say urinary tract infection with one medicine, another person will in next batch will take up thesis on the same topic with some other medicine. So even after doing those studies, is it going to change any trends in practice, whether it will give a better option as compared to the practices which are being done today is becomes an important question, because if our study is not going, or rather not going to change, or at least not trying to offer an alternative problems, then our study will remain as only as a thesis in our cupboard or in the cupboards of our library or in our department, but it will not have any impact, it will not have any relevance as far as the practices are concerned. So what would be the possible impact if the study becomes successful should also be considered before we begin. So, how to begin? We should have first the research question in our mind, and how to get an idea about the research question. So, for that purpose, we need to do a literature search, and the best way to get the literature search, or best method to find the literature search, is if it is a clinical study, we should try to find similar studies which are registered in the CTRI. CTRI, that is Clinical Trial Registry of India, is an open access URL, that is website, and whatever clinical studies are being done are supposed, or rather were done, are supposed to be registered in this CTRI. It is in public domain, so anyone on the globe can go to the CTRI website and can find researches done on some particular topic, or on some particular medicine, or on some particular procedure, and it also provides us and what we can say, not just outline but many other details of those registered studies are can also be seen. So if I want to do some study on osteoarthritis, I can go to the CTRI website. I can find out how many studies are registered about osteoarthritis in CTRI, and I can filter that search. Uh, if I want to see how many studies are registered in CTRI with some exercises in osteoarthritis of knee, I can get an idea what other people have done, what were the objectives, what were the sample size, what were the study durations, what were the investigations which were used, and so that I can find out what other people are doing. Because one particular aspect about research, or one particular thing that we see in the research, that it should be a novel concept, there should be some novelty, and it should not be mere repetition of previous work. So on CTRI website, or in published articles, we come to know both both the aspects, that is whether the particular study has already been done by someone, so that I can avoid duplication, and second thing, what are the methods which were used in previous studies for that particular condition. Both these things can be checked on CTRI or in previously published articles, and that actually helps us in defining the novelty of our particular study. For example, we are doing a study on osteoarthritis of knees uh, with some local application of Ayurvedic medicine. And when we searched in CTRI or in previously published articles, we came to know that uh, in Ayurveda, a lot of works are done and published on osteoarthritis of knee, but in no study there has been any evaluation by using dynamometer, which is considered as one of the best tools to measure the muscle strength. So we formulated a research question, and we added the dynamometer readings of knee muscles at each follow-up, and this is how we brought about the novelty in our research topic. Because so the thing that was not done before and which is relevant in today's scenario was added to our study, and the research question or the study was formulated. And the another idea is to discuss with your colleagues before we are formulating a research question. That can also be done. Now, whenever we are formulating a research question, the good idea must, as I have already discussed, it should fill the gap in knowledge. So there should be some novelty. So whenever we are proposing a new study, then we should have an account of what studies are already being done on that particular topic, on that particular health condition, or on that particular medicine or procedure, and what is not done in those particular studies, that also we should be able to highlight, so that we can explicitly demonstrate what is missing from the studies which are done before, and what we are going to do, or what we are planning uh, to do to fill the gap, or to or try to achieve that is not yet achieved, and that then becomes a good idea. Generally, when we are scrutinizing the proposals for PG or PhD works, this particular aspect is missing a lot, and that is why a lot of proposals get rejected, because the proposals are not able to demonstrate any novelty. Like I said before, that if a scholar A is doing some particular study in a health condition with medicine A, then scholar B will come, he will work on the same health condition with medicine B, and then there is no novelty in it. So this particular thing we should be able to avoid. So before proposing a study, we should have a thorough literature search, and we should mention it in our protocol about what has been done before, what has not been done before, and why it is important to do that particular thing which is not evaluated before, and how are we going to do it. Then after finding this particular aspect, that is the gap in the current knowledge and importance to fill that gap, we should also look at, is it feasible for us to do that particular study. If it is feasible to do that particular study in our institution or in our hospital and in our community. For example, we are here in Gujarat, and if I have some formulation that is very useful in treating the cases of leishmaniasis or Kala Azar, and if I propose a study on leishmaniasis in Parul University, probably the university will reject my topic, because though it is very good study, though it might be a very good study and a very novel study, but in our particular area, in our state, there are no cases of leishmaniasis. We hardly get a case of that particular condition. So it is not doable in our institute or in our hospital. That's why the study will get rejected. So whether the study problem is relevant as far as the institute or hospital is concerned, that also needs to be checked. It should be acceptable to our institute, and again, it should be in lines with the human welfare policies. So if I do a particular study of to see the effect of not doing regular exercises on some parameters, then it becomes irrelevant with the health policies or the good health practices that any doctor would be advising to a patient, because at the end of the study I may end up in concluding that is not doing exercise will not have any much impact on some particular thing. But on the other hand, after publishing my research work, or after submitting my thesis, it may also highlight that doing exercise is not at all important, or is doing exercise is also acceptable, but it is not according to the social policies, because day in and day out we see a lot of emphasis is being given uh, on doing regular exercises to keep oneself healthy. So my research work, however relevant it may be, it is not according to the human welfare policies or the accepted social beliefs. So that particular idea I will need to drop. So a good idea must be following or must be fulfilling these criteria. So what are the things which we include in a protocol? These are the general information, background, and justification of the problem. These 10 points we should be able to highlight or include or answer in our protocol. Let us see each one by one in a brief. First of all, the title. We must understand that the title is our selling point. If my study is very good, but the title is not good, then nobody will be interested to see what I am doing. So it should be informative, it should be easily understandable, but it should be long enough to give the detail of my study. For example, if I am doing a study on osteoarthritis with some medicine A, then just mentioning that efficacy of medicine A in osteoarthritis will not be a good title. But if I frame it like an open label randomized comparative clinical study to evaluate the effect of medicine A in osteoarthritis of knee with special reference to muscle strength, then my title becomes clear. After reading my title, the reader will be able to understand that it is a comparative study, a randomized study to see the effect of this particular medicine in improvement of muscle strength in arthritis of knee. Then total information is delivered to that particular reader, and if the reader is interested, he will definitely look into the details of my study. So the title, we should see it as a showcase of a shop. Whatever is displayed in showcase becomes the point of attraction for the probable customers. So it is our selling point, and it should be concise but informative. Then in general information, we need to include the name of investigational drug or procedures, the name and titles of the investigators, the collaborating departments, the particular certificates, like that. Then whatever material we have used to formulate the research question, to see whether it is relevant, to see whether it has any novelty, whether it is in lines with the policies of our university or institutions or human welfare policies. That all information we should put in the background and justification, uh, in a form of statement problem. So what health condition, what research problem we are planning, and the justification in terms of the importance in that part of that of doing research work in that particular area, based on the magnitude or the frequency of the problem, based on the gap in the existing knowledge that we can find out through a thorough literature search. Then what research questions we are going to address, and what contribution it can make, what impact it could have if the study is successful, that we should include in the part of background and justification of the problem. If it is a clinical study, if it is a new molecule that we are trying to evaluate, then the summary of potential risk and benefits which the patient can suffer from, those should be included. Then we should have a statement that the studies will be done according to the GCP guidelines, or whatever regulatory guidelines we are going to follow, those will be followed. That should be included. Then the justification of the dose, if it is a clinical study, justification of the dose, the regimen, the treatment period, or the justification of the comparator should be added. For example, if I am doing a study on on to evaluate the immunomodulatory effect of some particular medicine, let us say Chyawanprash. And if I plan the study of only 15 days, then in 15 days, the Chyawanprash may not show any immunomodulatory effect. So I have to plan the study at least of 3 months or 6 months. So justification of our treatment period, the regimen, the comparator dosage, all should be included in the background and justification. Then we should have an explanation about the objectives. Whenever we are taking admission to particular course, and if we are very ambitious, then we try to put everything into one proposal and make the study over ambitious. Like if I want to study an obesity, I'm very enthusiastic researcher, then, and if I put objectives like to determine burdens, the determinants, prevention, and control of obesity, it becomes an over ambitious proposal. Because to find out the burdens due to obesity, the determinants of obesity, prevention of obesity, and control of obesity, all four are different studies. So our studies should avoid the over ambitiousness, they should be precise, and we should be able to highlight our objectives into primary and secondary objectives. Primary objectives is the thing that must be achieved or that must be looked for in each and every case, and that is the particular thing that helps us in defining the study design and the study methods. For example, if I am doing a study in the diabetes mellitus, then my primary objective can be to see the reduction in the blood sugar fasting and postprandial and glycosylated hemoglobin. So in my research design or in my study design, I will add blood sugar fasting and PP and glycosylated hemoglobin at particular time interval, and I will do it, and those will be my primary objectives. The secondary objectives may be of interest, but it is not essential to evaluate though all those secondary objectives in each and every case and at each particular time. For example, in the same study of diabetes mellitus, as we know that the people suffering from diabetes may also suffer from dyslipidemia, my secondary objective can be to see the effect of my particular of my treatment or my procedure on lipid levels, but that is not my primary objective. So even though I fail to achieve results in uh, lowering lipid levels, I can claim my study as successful if my primary objectives are fulfilled. If there is statistically significant change, if I am able to demonstrate in my primary objectives, I can accept the alternative hypothesis. But even though if I don't get any results in the lipid profiles. So primary objectives are something that that are a must to be done in each and every case and at particular time frame. And secondary objectives are those that even if we fail to achieve those objectives, the study can still be claimed as a relevant study or a positive study. So we should not overburden ourselves by over ambitious proposal, and we should be able to define the primary and secondary objectives. Now, how these objectives should be? They should be SMART, like specific, they should be measurable, they should be achievable or accessible, they should be realistic and relevant to the study, and they should be time based. Like for a PhD type of study, we have a maximum of 4 or 5 years to complete our study. And if I want to find out the effects of COVID-19 infection in long run, then I may have, however relevant the study is, however good the study is, my study design of only 2 or 3 years will not be sufficient to see the long-term effects or to evaluate the long-term effects of COVID-19 in human volunteer in the patients. So for that particular study, I'll need to plan a cohort study of at least 10 to 10 years or 20 years, and if it is my PhD study, I'll be able to get the PhD degree only after 20 years. So whether our objectives are time based or timely in this particular or realistic to achieve the PhD, they are not. So our objectives should be of these particular properties. They should be specific, like for example in diabetes, specifically BSL, fasting PP and glycosylated will be a specific parameters. In obesity, the waist to hip ratio, not just weight, but measuring waist to hip ratio, measuring skin fold thickness, measuring if the researcher finds it important, measuring the lipid profile levels will be specific objectives of that particular study. They should be measurable, and the biggest hurdle in finding the measurable objectives is when we are dealing with the pain. For example, if I'm doing a study on low back pain, pain is the thing that we observe in many clinical practices day in and day out, but it cannot be measured very objectively. So whenever we are doing any study in some health condition that has pain as its presenting feature, we should try to have some more parameters which are better measurable than pain, like some inflammatory markers or some ESR like thing, to claim that our results are reliable and those are measured with utmost objectivity or utmost objectivity. Whenever we are dealing with this pain like condition, we can understand that due to the less objectivity of measuring pain, a lot of questionnaires are developed, a lot of other parameters can also be thought of if if the researcher or if you think that this particular objective is not measurable like that. So our objectives should be smart. For Ayush stream, defining the objectives become difficult because whether to rely on traditional medicine or the same parameters of Western medicine should be used becomes a question. Difference in philosophy, modern sciences think on some different uh, are developed on some different philosophies, and Ayush or specifically Ayurveda or yoga is developed using on the basis of some different philosophy. So the difference in philosophy can become an hurdle in defining the objectives. Can we expect the similar endpoints, like if I'm working on osteoarthritis, can reduction in pain, which is very easily achieved and effectively achieved by something like diclofenac. So if I want to compare my particular medicine with diclofenac, my Ayurvedic medicine may not be able to help in relieving pain to the greater extent, but it may be helpful in improving the health of that particular joint so that there is no pain in long run. So for that, this particular study, can we have the same endpoints which are already used in established medicine such as diclofenac becomes a question. uh, in Ayurveda especially, it is difficult to translate the same terminologies or the same diseases which are explained in modern sciences into Ayurveda or vice versa. So the disease entities might not be same. One particular disease explained in Ayurveda may contain 4 to 5 differential diagnoses from modern science, and the same thing happens in for one particular diagnosis of modern science. There could be 5 or 6 alternative Ayurvedic diagnoses. So the disease entities are not same. So whether we can compare those or not becomes a problem. So these are some difficulties for Ayush researchers to define the objectives, and becomes the next step in our synopsis is the research question. So research question is basically designed to show the relation between the two or more variables, whether A is related with B, whether relieving in pain is associated with administration of particular drug or not. That is the research question. Uh, in literature studies, there might be some difficulty in formulating the research questions, but it should be kept in mind that all the researches, whether it is a literature search, whether it is a survey study, whether it is a laboratory study, whether it is a clinical study, in all the types of researches, in all the streams of researches, there has to be a research question. There can be no research without a research question. Then becomes the hypothesis. Uh, then we should explain the hypothesis. Hypothesis is the tentative explanation that accounts for the set of facts that is that helps in defining the expected relationship between the variables. It should be consistent with the research question. It should be simple and concise. There are two types of hypothesis. That is null hypothesis, that it shows that there is no relationship between the variables, that is relieving in pain is not associated with administration of one particular medicine. And there is alternative hypothesis, that is that establishes the relationship between the variables, that is relieving in pain is associated with administration of medicine. So these are the two hypotheses. Accepting null hypothesis indicates that the research is negative, that there are no significant results seen in that particular research. And alternative hypothesis indicates that the research is relevant and it has got some significant results as far as the variables or the research question is considered. Then becomes the most important part in the protocol, that are the methods. What procedures we are going to adopt to achieve the objectives. So the methods should define what are we going to do and how are we going to collect the data. That becomes the part in methodology. In clinical studies, defining the study subjects becomes very important, because we can compare apples with apples. We cannot compare apples with oranges. So in clinical studies, defining the study subjects is important, rather can become problematic if we don't focus on it. So the in methodology, we should first define the study subject, what we call our study subject as. So if we are going to uh, work on some particular disease condition, so what particular uh, diagnostic criteria we are going to use to include the patient or to diagnose that particular condition should be included. For example, if we are going to work in COVID-19, so whether we are going to include patients who are diagnosed by RT-PCR, or whether we are going to include patients diagnosed by rapid antigen test needs to be defined. If we are going to include, if we are going to do a study on hypertension, how are we going to define our study subjects becomes important. So are we going to follow some particular guideline for diagnosis? Because in textbooks of medicine or surgery or any other stream of medicine have particular diagnostic criterias, and out of those diagnostic criterias, which criterias we are going to use to set a mark for inclusion or exclusion of subjects needs to be defined. Then other criteria for inclusion and exclusion, that this particular condition diagnosed by this particular way, and between the age group of 18, let us say 18 to 60 or 18 to 50 or whatever the requirement of the study may be. So uh, Other aspects of inclusion and exclusion needs to be defined. For example, like age group, like socio-economical status, if it is needed to include patients from certain socio-economical status or certain area or certain city or certain village, that needs to be included in defining the study subjects. Then what mechanism we are going to use for recruitment of subjects, whether we are going to have some camps, whether we are going to do some advertising, whether we are going to distribute the pamphlets, that needs to be defined when we are defining the recruitment of study subjects. Then how many follow-ups are designed, how are we going to assess the data of the patients by directly examining or by questioning the patient or by some biochemical parameters or by imaging, that like that needs to be defined. And last but not the least, whether that particular pool of subjects is representative of the community, that needs to be highlighted or that needs to be answered in defining the study subjects. For Ayush clinical studies, these are some questions: whether we are going to take freshly diagnosed cases or chronic cases, whether we are going to take patients who are on conventional medicines or we are going to drop those and keep on only Ayush medicines, whether we are going to take, whether we are taking any advanced cases or some Ayush or Ayurveda specific concepts are there like Prakruti and etc. So what are we going to do about these aspects while we are defining the study subjects that needs to be considered. Then sampling, how are we going to do the sampling, like which areas which are going to we are going to cover. If we are doing study in Parul University, then we do are we going to conduct any survey in the total Vadodara district or in Vagodia village or in Limda or in Ishwarpura, like that needs to be defined. So what is the frame of our samples, what are the methods, whether it is a random hello, am I audible? There was a break in internet connection.
Yes, now you are audible, sir.
Okay. So the sample size, what sample size we are looking at? See, the sample size should be sufficiently small to avoid ethical issues, but it should be sufficiently large at the same time to have the relevant data. So the sample size, its definition, what power it is going to give to our study, and it should be based on our principal or primary objective. And is it feasible to achieve that particular sample size in one center? That also needs to be defined. If it is not possible to get that particular number of patients at one center, we can go for another center or another centers and make it a multicentric study. Then what is the study design? This is actually the study design is a topic for lectures together, but just to have a brief outline, to determine the frequency of burden of a disease, we generally go for a cross-sectional or cohort type of study. To identify the risk factors, again we go for cohort or case control studies. To define the prognosis of a disease, we need to go for a cohort study design. To determine the efficacy or the of the treatment, we need to go for clinical studies or community interventions. To evaluate the community programs, we need to go for evaluation type of study designs. So these are the common study design used for some particular purposes. Then what comparator we are going to use. Like if it is a single group study, then the possibility of having acceptance is less. But if it is a comparative clinical study, if it is a comparative study, then possibility of having acceptance increases. So we need to have, as far as possible, a comparator in our study. It may be a placebo or it may be a control. The problem with placebo is that it should be truly inert. For Ayurvedic scholars or for researchers in Ayurveda, it becomes really difficult to have a placebo that is inert and that looks same, that tastes same, that smells same like study medicine. Like for Chyawanprash, we cannot have a truly inert placebo, and it becomes difficult to match the color test like that. So if we go for a standard control, then a standard control offers a stiff competition. So possibility of having equivocal or negative results becomes more. So we need to find a balance in between these two, to either to have a truly inert placebo or to have such type of standard control that is actually comparable with our medicine. Then in the protocol, we should define about the collection of data, what data we are going to include from the demographic details, lab details, and clinical details. Which primary objectives are converted into primary efficacy variables. Secondary objectives are converted as secondary efficacy variables, and apart from that, there can be some safety variables, some biochemical parameters, or uh, as a rule in all clinical studies, assessment of adverse events by default is a safety variable which needs to be included in our protocol. So then we need to explain the methods of data collection, how we are going to collect the data, and when we are going to collect the data, what methods we are going to ensure that the quality of data collected is good. For example, if I am going to ask some particular questions, or if I am going to assess some particular parameter using a questionnaire, what precaution will I take to avoid false positive or false negative responses? If I am going to measure lipid profile in each and every patient, how I am going to make sure that the patient is at least 8 hours fasting before giving the sample, so that whatever results of lipid profile I am going to include in my study become reliable. So the method of collecting the data needs to be explained in our protocol. If the data is a subjective data based on the symptoms of patient, then how we are going to have that particular data by an interview or by a review of record or the case papers. If it is an interview, who is going to take the interview, and if it is going to be supervised by some particular by the guide or by some other person or not. If it is a questionnaire, then if it is then is it a self or an interview based questionnaire, that needs to be defined. Whether the interview will be taken face to face or telephonically or through some online platforms or through Google Forms or through some other mobile apps, that needs to be defined. And what procedures we are going to follow while collecting the data all needs to be outlined. The difficulties we need to keep in mind before we freeze one particular method, that it is very difficult to get accurate data for subjective criteria, because the subjective criteria can vary with time, with or without treatment. And the best example is pain. For example, if I had a fight with my wife before coming to office, and if I uh, if I have a follow-up of one particular condition in which I am a participant, then due to that quarrel or due to that particular thing happened in today, uh, the intensity of my pain will increase without any other reason. On the other hand, if I get good increment today and I am told by my superiors that your performance is good, then even without any other reason, my pain will reduce today. So this particular symptom has responded even without treatment and due to other circumstances. So it is difficult to really to get the account of subjective data. That's why a lot of care needs to be taken while collecting the data about subjective criteria. It is also difficult to get description of particular symptoms from the patients, like throbbing pain or pins and needles like pain. The patient might not be able to explain in that particular way. So it again becomes difficult to grade the symptoms on that particular basis. And if the questionnaires are too long, the patient firstly answers well, but at the end he just answers randomly. That is the problem with long questionnaires. So these are some difficulties in collection of data that we should keep in mind to define our methods of data collection and avoid collection of faulty data. Then at the end, we should analyze the data, the appropriate statistical tests which we are going to use, the list of variables, who is going to analyze the data, whether the scholar or the researcher himself will analyze, how the data will be analyzed using SPSS or using any other software. If it is SPSS, which version of SPSS will be used, for how much period the data will be retained, all that should be included in our protocol. Then what are the endpoints? What degree of improvement we are going to explain, or we are going to expect that needs to be explained, and what is the criteria of defining a success? For example, if in a case of diabetes mellitus, if the blood sugar level drops below 100 mg per dl as compared to the baseline, we are going to define it as a good study. If it drops less than 100 mg per dl or it increases, it is considered that the study is giving negative results. Those endpoints should be explained, and these endpoints are based on the previous studies done in this particular condition. These endpoints are also dependent on the in vitro data or animal study data. These three things actually dictate us about the endpoints of that particular uh, study. Then we should explain about the investigational product, whether it is traditional or it is new, the reference of that particular product or that particular procedure. If it is a medicine, then ingredients. If it is a medicine, then method of preparation, the acceptability, palatability, and how are we going to check the compliance, that needs to be explained. How are we going to standardize that particular medicine also needs to be explained. What methods we are going to use to standardize the raw materials or to check the stability. If the medicine is going to be prepared in multiple batches, how are we going to check the batch to batch quality to avoid the variation in different batches? How are we going to check the shelf life? Like that needs we need to define. How what is the dose calculation of the particular medicine or the particular procedure? If it is related with physiotherapy, then for how much duration the subject will be the patient will be subjected to that particular exercise or that particular procedure, that needs to be explained on the basis of whatever is mentioned in the classics or books, on the basis of historical use which we can get from the previously published articles, or if it is not mentioned in any other classical textbooks or in previous articles, then on the basis of preclinical data or on the basis of pilot data, we can define the particular dose or duration of that procedure. Then safety parameters, like I said before, in all clinical studies, assessment of adverse events and serious adverse events is by default a safety parameter. Apart from that, if there are any biochemical parameters or radiological parameters, then we need to define the safety parameters as well. Then ethics, we need to, if it is a clinical study, we need to have, or even for a survey study, we need to have an informed consent form. uh, the guidelines which are given by the ethics committee, those should be followed in this particular point. Then we need to define the timetable, what time we are going to take to recruit the subject, to complete the follow-up, for the for analysis of data, and working and to present it in the report or in the form of article. That needs to be defined in the form of timetable. Then what resources we are going to have or we have at our disposal, like we have a sophisticated lab, or the lab which is uh, which is useful in this particular study is already available. We have a tie-up, we have an MOU with them. All those things should be mentioned in the term of resources, to highlight that we have all particular arrangements which we require in that particular study. Then if it is a sponsored study, then who is a sponsor, what is the budget, all those should be added. Then the references, the bibliography of that particular study needs to be added. Appendices, if it is uh, if we are going to use some questionnaires, then those should be added actually in the form of appendices. Then list of definitions, introductory letters by the participants, like that, adverse event form or serious adverse event reporting mechanism, or the CVs of the people who are investigators or co-investigators, the undertakings or any insurance details, if it is a sponsored or insured study, all those should be added as an appendices. So while we are coming up with a research protocol, what we should look at is to have a clear and relevant objectives, to go for a simple study design with one primary objective and one or two secondary objectives, to have a comparator, either a placebo or a standard control, which is matching to our study intervention, to have the study randomized, or to do the study in a randomized way, or if possible by single or double blinding, to avoid the biases, to have relevant efficacy measures and more of objective parameters than the subjective parameters, to have sufficiently large sample size to produce valid data, and to have a statistics that is not just statistically significant but also have a clinical relevance, and to have a publication in a peer reviewed data. So the great people are those who don't do different things, but they do the things differently by following particular method that can bring about change in the society. So with that, I would like to thank you. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks a lot for your patient listening. If there are any questions, I would like to have.
Thank you, sir, for your elaborate guidance. There is one query in chat box. Hope it is not answered by Ishwari Salian. Sir, is it must that objective findings, including diagnostic test findings, should be one of the objectives of the study?
See, in some conditions, we do not or we cannot have objective parameters, like in pain. If you are going to work on pain, then for pain there is really not any objective parameter. But as far as possible, we should try to include objective parameters. Sometimes the availability of particular tests or availability of particular investigation can be a problem, but we should try to have, as far as possible, some or other objective criteria to make our study relevant and to avoid uh, the biases in collecting the subjective parameters.
Okay. Is the single arm study totally invalid?
Single arm studies are not totally invalid, but the areas in which the single arm studies are relevant is very, very less. So, and especially related with Ayush, there are already treatments which are established either in conventional by conventional medicine or in Ayush medicine. So for particularly Ayush type of studies, we can find some comparator, and unless and until we have some comparator with our in our study, we cannot claim that our study uh, is at par with the treatment modalities which are currently being used. If there is totally absence of any comparator, if it is totally a new area, then we can go for a single arm study. But like I said, the area of having these type of the area is very, very less.
Okay. Yes, thank you, sir. There are no more queries, hope so. There is no hand raised and no query in the chat box. Thank you, sir, for your elaborative explanation and accepting our invitation and delivering the lecture. I thank all the scholars for patient listening. So we will end this meeting now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.